Well, joining us in the studio now is Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former NATO commander and former MOD Director General. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio.
Thanks, Chris.
Chris, it's going to be increasingly difficult now with these images coming out, a strike on a refugee camp, whatever justification the IDF give for that, for Western powers and Western voters to continue to back this kind of military operation, do you think?
Of course it is. I think when you're fighting in cities and when people say refugee camp, it isn't a camp, of course. It's a built-up area with buildings and things like that. You're always going to have problems differentiating between terrorists who are hiding in plain sight and the local population. We found the same in Northern Ireland, of course, trying to actually sort out who were the players and who were actually part of the normal population. All I know is that democracies, and that includes Israel, generally try to obey the rules of warfare. They try to minimise casualties, but at the same time, they're risking their own lives, of course, to actually go in and sort out these terrorists. And the one question that hasn't been answered by anybody is how does Israel get justice for what happened on the 7th of October? That's a question that nobody is even thinking about. And unless we can find an answer to that, Israel will find its own solutions.
And I think you. It's great to have you on, Chris. We've worked together many times. I think that is the big issue. I don't think anybody, and I find myself, it's rolling news, I find myself repeating myself every hour of every day. What happened on October the 7th was genocide. What happened on October the 7th? Don't forget 1,400 deaths. If you hear about that girl's skull yesterday, if you see some of the disgusting images, I understand the absolute horror that the Jewish people feel across the world, and the anti-Semitism that has happened as a result of it is disgusting. And of course a country wants to do something about that. I think what Nicola absolutely rightly asks is, nobody would deny their right to do something about that. But is it feasible? You're a military man, is it feasible to get rid of Hamas, rid the world of this terrorist organisation? Or will it splinter out? We were reading yesterday, Chris, 1.5 billion quid they get in financial aid from Qatar and other countries. It's often goes further afield when you look at what they did. Are the IDF able to do this, or is this going to escalate into something that's never achievable, and there will be casualty after casualty? And as Nick says, the world will look on and go, well, that's not great.
The IDF have got to deal with the problem they see in front of them right now. And what they're trying to do is minimise the risks associated with fighting in built-up areas, which is the worst situation to have to deal with, by actually demolishing the buildings. You've probably seen these teddy bear Caterpillar tractors going in. Back in 2004-05, the Israelis developed this principle in Lebanon of walking through walls. They found that if we went down the streets, they were confronted by anti-tank and automatic fire weapons and things like that. So they said, fine, we're not going to go down the streets, we're going to go straight through walls. And that's what they're doing in Gaza right now, is if you don't want to fight in built-up areas, well, demolish the built-up areas. And, you know, you go back to the Roman writer Tacitus, he said you create a desolation and call it peace. And that the IDF sort of calculation will be that if we actually clear out the cover, we can differentiate the civilians from the terrorists, deal with the terrorists in the tunnels. And Hamas, God bless them, have actually said the only people in the tunnels are our own operators. So they've told the Israelis clear and simple that if anybody's in a tunnel, they're Hamas.
From a military point of view, what do you make of the IDF strategy? Netanyahu yesterday said this is war. We had people on this show yesterday quite rightly saying war is awful. War will come with casualties. What's your view of the whole thing?
Well, my view is that a lot of people are confused about the term proportionate. Proportionate doesn't mean equal. It means you deal with the problem in a way in which you can.
Yep.
And right now, and Jeremy, you pointed out, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of emotion in Israel. Their country has been violated, their women have been violated, and some of the worst crimes known to man were committed on the 7th of October. And I defy any country not to say we need to be able to make an example of Hamas, and we need to say to the Palestinian people, if you want to support this sort of organisation in future, this is what is going to happen. And we might not like it, and it actually conflicts with what we think in the West, but Israel is a prison as long as people are seeking to attack it, to exterminate the Jewish people. That is what Hamas say they want to do. And as long as we have that sort of, and I have to say it, fascist-type attitude in the world, we have to deal with it.
Yeah. And what about the wider implications of different countries here? Iran, as Jeremy mentioned earlier, Qatar. The likelihood that this is going to escalate into all-out war within the Middle East?
Well, I think we've got to look at the motivations of quite a lot of outside partners here. Russia, Iran, as you say, Nicola, but also China as well. Iran does nothing without China's say-so. And we know that in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, the agents of the Iranian state are very active indeed. And they make no bones about the fact that they want to eliminate Israel and all the Jews that live there. And what we've got to worry about is that in about 2 or 3 years' time, Iran will have a nuclear device. Because that's what Obama said he could do.
Well, there were 2 drones, weren't there, that were aimed at a US base in Syria earlier in the week, which didn't hit their target. I think the world, quite rightly, is wondering what is going to happen next. I mean, let me ask you about something we're going to be talking about later on, this border crossing. Yeah. Ramallah. I don't...
Rafah.
Thank you. I don't genuinely understand why... I mean, it's played out on the internet. The Israelis are saying we can't send the aid in because essentially Hamas will hijack the fuel and will use it against its own people. Hamas is saying the Israelis aren't doing it. Egypt are getting involved. What's your view on that situation? Because I don't understand that at all.
Well, at the moment, you've got a situation where Gaza has been contained over probably 20 years by both Egypt and Israel. Egypt doesn't know how to cope with vast numbers of Palestinians who've been radicalised coming into their country. They're very worried about their own situation. But in terms of escalation, Jeremy, 2 American aircraft carriers make a very large statement. And Hezbollah just has to breathe across the border in the north, and I anticipate the Americans will take action very quickly. Same in Yemen. Yemen, the Houthi rebels said, oh, we're declaring war on Israel yesterday. Well, let's just see how brave they are when an American aircraft carrier turns up. The Americans are determined to contain this situation. Iran isn't ready to fight America just yet. And Russia, of course, is distracted in Syria and Ukraine. So the way I see it, we've got a contained crisis at the moment. As long as Iran doesn't let loose Hezbollah in the north, then this will all be about Gaza and about Hamas, and quite rightly so. These are unspeakable crimes. And if we allow this sort of thing to become normalised, we'll see it across the Middle East and in the wider world as well.
Difficult question to answer. How does this end? What is the end game here? Where does it start?
The end game can be very short. Hamas gives up the hostages. It actually says what are the terms that Israel will accept for peace. I'm afraid to say that from the Israeli point of view, you've got a very right-wing, very aggressive Prime Minister.
Can I just add, I'd love your thoughts on this briefly, Chris, who I think, yes, aggressively right-wing, you've said, but it will forever be on him that this happened on his watch. And we all know what the Israeli surveillance and intelligence services are supposed to be like. This cannot have happened overnight. This must have been planned and was a major miss. And I think Netanyahu's approach is as much about putting that right, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, politically, he's a dead man walking.
He is.
There's no question. Yeah. And but I am worried about overreach, overreaction. If the Israelis commit themselves just to actually dealing with Hamas in Gaza and don't seek to sort of go anywhere else and sort out other problems, then we'll have a contained crisis. If they decide they want to deal with all their enemies at once, they'll have a problem on their hands, probably 7 fronts to deal with, and also outside interference is almost guaranteed.
And what do you think about the effects this is going to have over in the UK? Obviously, politically at the moment, both our Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition seem to be quite steadfast in their support of Israel not seeking a ceasefire. What is your opinion on calls from not just certain politicians, but the British public for a ceasefire? OK, a ceasefire simply rewards the aggressors. If we had a ceasefire in Ukraine right now, it would reward Russia for its aggression. As a military man, a ceasefire just gives your opponent breathing space to rearm, replenish, and actually get in your teeth again. And so a ceasefire right now would be incredibly stupid from a military point of view. It's attractive from a political and, shall we say, performative point of view. But Hamas doesn't want a ceasefire. I mean, the one party that isn't calling for a ceasefire is the party that's firing rockets day and night into Israel. So why on earth are people calling for a ceasefire when one of the parties to the conflict doesn't want it?